The story opens with the ballroom scene, establishing the luxurious setting, while introducing Paulette's paranoid state through her repeated sightings of the mysterious man. The building tension escalates as she realizes she's being followed, not just tonight, but for weeks. This creates the inciting incident, her panicked flight and public confrontation. The introduction of Haniel as a powerful, calm figure who physically restrains her in front of Souls, Elite creates immediate visual drama and social tension. The hook climaxes with the shocking revelation, because they're trying to kill you, reframing him from stalker to protector. The scene ends with the revelation that this man is feared by everyone in the room, and there's a dark mystery about the real danger surrounding Paulette. Paulette woke to silk sheets and the smell of jasmine, her head pounding like someone had stuffed her skull with cotton. The ceiling above her was unfamiliar, smooth white plaster, recessed lighting that glowed soft as moonlight. This wasn't her cramped studio apartment with its water-stained walls and neighbors who fought at 3 a.m. She bolted upright, heart slamming against her ribs. The room was enormous, decorated in muted grays and cream, floor-to-ceiling windows revealing a private garden she'd never seen before. Panic clawed up her throat. The door opened. Haniel entered carrying a tablet, dressed now in a black turtleneck and slacks, looking less like the man who'd grabbed her in public and more like someone who belonged in a boardroom. 2 guards flanked him, silent as shadows. "Where am I?" Paulette's voice came out rough, accusatory. "My compound. You were sedated for transport, a precaution, not a punishment." He set the tablet on the nightstand beside her. "You're safe here." "Safe?" She laughed bitterly, throwing off the covers. She was still in her waitress uniform, though someone had removed her shoes. "You drugged me. You kidnapped me." "I saved your life." His tone remained maddeningly calm. He tapped the tablet, pulling up surveillance photos. "This is Park Min-yi. He works for the Gwangju trafficking ring. He was 30 seconds from injecting you with a sedative last night." The image showed a man in a service uniform, syringe visible in his jacket. "This is Lee Sun-hee, the van driver. She's moved 43 women in the past year. None have been recovered." Paulette's stomach turned, but she forced herself to look at each photo he showed her. Women's faces, some blurred, some clear. Documents with names, dates, locations. Her own name appeared on a spreadsheet, highlighted in red. Acquisition target, high value, American passport. No family ties in Seoul. "This is a lie," she whispered, even as her hands shook. "You made this up too." "To what? Justify holding you here." Haniel's jaw tightened. "I've spent 3 weeks keeping them away from you, Paulette. 3 weeks watching you serve champagne to the same people who fund their operations." She stood abruptly, backing toward the window. "Then let me leave. I'll go to the police. The police have 5 officers on their payroll. You'd be in a shipping container by morning." He moved closer, not threatening but immovable. "You're not my prisoner. You're my responsibility." "I didn't ask for that." Her voice cracked with fury. "I didn't ask for any of this. Your sister was taken 8 years ago." The words hung in the air like smoke. "I wasn't there to stop it. I won't make that mistake again." Paulette stared at him, seeing something raw flicker across his face before the mask returned. She wanted to scream, to fight, to run. Instead, she said quietly, "Show me to my room." The guards led her down a marble hallway to quarters that would have cost more per month than she earned in a year. Cream carpet, a bathroom with heated floors, a wardrobe already filled with clothes in her size. Beautiful, suffocating. When she tested the door an hour later, it wouldn't open from the inside. She pounded on it until her fists ached. "Let me out." No one answered. At midnight, she tried the window. It slid open easily, too easily. She was lowering herself onto the ledge when floodlights blazed to life, illuminating the 15-foot drop and the 3 guards positioned below. One looked up at her with something like pity. "Come back inside, miss. It's not safe out here." Paulette climbed back through the window, slammed it shut, and pressed her back against the wall. Her fury had teeth now, sharp and hungry. This gilded cage might be lined with silk, but it was still a cage, and she would find a way out. The second escape attempt was almost elegant in its desperation. Paulette had studied the guard rotations for 3 days, memorized the gaps in their patrols, and waited until the shift change at dawn, when exhaustion made men careless. She'd slipped through the service entrance wearing borrowed kitchen staff clothes, her heart hammering as she crossed the compound's eastern garden. She was 50 feet from the outer gate when gunfire shattered the morning quiet. The world exploded into chaos. Haniel's men poured from every doorway, weapons drawn, shouting commands in rapid Korean. Someone tackled her to the ground, covering her body with theirs as bullets chewed into the stone wall where she'd been standing. Through the ringing in her ears, she heard more gunfire, then silence, heavy and absolute. When they finally let her up, she saw 3 bodies being dragged away from the perimeter fence. One wore the same jacket as the man from Hanyul's surveillance photos, Park Min-yi. Her legs wouldn't hold her. She collapsed onto the grass, shaking violently. Hanyul appeared minutes later, his expression carved from ice. He dismissed the guards with a sharp gesture, then stood over her, waiting. When she finally looked up at him, she expected fury. Instead, she saw something that looked like exhaustion. "Come with me," he said quietly. He led her to his private study, a room she hadn't seen before, lined with bookshelves and photographs. He poured 2 glasses of whiskey despite the early hour, handed her one, and drank his own in a single swallow. "Her name was My Son," he began, his back to her as he stared at a photograph on his desk. "My younger sister. She was 19 when they took her." Paulette's grip tightened on her glass. She wanted to study nursing. She volunteered at a free clinic in Itaewon, helping foreign workers who couldn't afford proper healthcare. His voice was flat, controlled, like he was reading from a script he'd memorized. "I thought she was being naive, reckless. I told her those people would take advantage of her kindness." He turned, and Paulette saw the photograph clearly now. A young woman with Hanyul's sharp features, softened by youth and an open smile. She was standing beside other volunteers, her arm around a woman who looked Southeast Asian. One of the clinic's administrators was recruiting for the trafficking ring. My son trusted her. They took her during a night shift. Hanyul's jaw clenched. "By the time I mobilized my resources, she was already gone. Moved through 3 countries in 72 hours. I spent 2 years searching. Found nothing but whispers and closed doors." "I'm sorry," Paulette whispered, the words inadequate. "I was too arrogant to see the danger until she was gone." He set down his glass with careful precision. "I told myself I was protecting our family's interests, maintaining our territory. But the truth is I was building the same empire that enabled men like Park Min-yi to exist. My father's legacy. My shame." He crossed to where she sat and lowered himself into the chair across from her, meeting her eyes directly for the first time since entering the room. "You're not my son, I know that, but when I saw your name on that list," his voice cracked just barely, "I couldn't let history repeat itself, not when I had the power to stop it." Paulette saw him then, not the untouchable Mafia boss or the controlling captor, but a man carrying 8 years of guilt on his shoulders. A man who'd watched his sister vanish and had been trying to atone ever since. "This isn't about control," she said slowly, understanding blooming painful and clear. "It's about atonement." Yes, the single word carried the weight of everything unsaid. By the second week, Paulette thought she might lose her mind from the careful monotony of captivity. The luxury room felt smaller each day, the silence between meals heavier. She'd read every book in the compound's library, worn paths in the carpet with her packing, and exhausted every argument for her release. So she wandered into the industrial kitchen out of desperate boredom, thinking at least her hands could be useful, if her voice couldn't convince anyone of anything. The cook, an older woman named Mrs. Shin, who spoke broken English, looked startled when Paulette appeared in the doorway asking to help. But when Paulette took over chopping vegetables with practiced efficiency, something in the woman's expression softened. By dinner, they were working side by side in comfortable silence, punctuated by shared gestures and the occasional Korean phrase Mrs. Shin taught her. The guards noticed the smell first. Paulette had made jambalaya using whatever ingredients she could find, gochugaru substituting for cayenne, Korean sausage instead of andouille. It wasn't perfect, but it smelled like home, like the grandmother who'd raised her, like freedom. One guard peered into the kitchen, then another. Mrs. Shin served them bowls without asking permission. Their faces transformed with the first bite, surprise giving way to something almost like joy. By the next evening, 4 more staff members had found excuses to be near the kitchen during meal preparation. "You teach?" one of the younger guards asked in halting English, watching Paulette fold dumplings with quick, precise movements. She looked up, surprised. "Teach you to cook." He nodded eagerly. 2 others stepped forward, equally interested. Something loosened in Paulette's chest. She wasn't their prisoner in the kitchen. She was just a woman who knew her way around food, sharing something that transcended language and circumstances. Within days, her impromptu cooking lessons became a routine. She taught them her grandmother's cornbread, showed them how to season cast iron properly, demonstrated the difference between a simmer and a boil. They taught her Korean recipes in return, kimchi jjigae, bibimbap, the proper way to fold mandu. The kitchen transformed into something unexpected, a space where guards laughed, where Mrs. Shin hummed old songs, where Paulette almost forgot she wasn't free. Hanyul watched from the doorway sometimes. She'd catch him there in her peripheral vision, his expression unreadable as she guided a guard's knife through garlic cloves or corrected someone's grip on a wooden spoon. He never entered, never interrupted, just observed like he was trying to understand something that didn't fit into his carefully controlled world. One evening, Mrs. Shin left early for a family obligation. The staff had already eaten. Paulette was plating the last of the bulgogi she'd attempted, probably poorly, when Hanyul appeared in the empty kitchen. "You didn't have dinner," she said, more statement than question. "I was working." "Sit." She surprised herself with the command, surprised herself more when he obeyed, settling onto one of the kitchen stools like he'd never been served in his own house before. She set the plate before him, added rice, poured tea. It felt absurdly domestic, dangerous in its normalcy. He ate slowly, deliberately, his eyes closing briefly at the first bite. "This is good." "Don't sound so shocked," but she smiled despite herself. "Where did you learn to cook like this?" "My grandmother," she said. Food was the language everyone spoke, even when everything else got lost in translation. Paulette leaned against the counter, arms crossed. Guess she was right. They ate together in comfortable silence. No guards, no tension, no talk of trafficking rings or dead sisters or protective captivity. Just two people sharing a meal in a quiet kitchen, the compound's fluorescent lights softening into something almost warm. When he looked at her across the steam rising from their bowls, she didn't see her captor. She saw a man who was lonely in ways he'd never admit, and for the first time since the ballroom, she let herself see him as human. The attack came at 2 in the morning, when even vigilance grew tired. Paulette woke to the sound of breaking glass and muffled gunfire. Her door burst open, not guards, but Hanyul himself, his weapon drawn, his face hard with focus. "Stay behind me, don't make a sound." She didn't argue. Terror made her compliant as he pulled her into the hallway, moving with practiced efficiency through the compound. Shouts echoed from multiple directions. More gunfire. The acrid smell of smoke drifted through the air. They were halfway to the safe room when a figure dropped from the ceiling vent ahead of them, impossibly fast, blade gleaming in the emergency lighting. Hanyul fired twice, but the assailant twisted, closing the distance with terrifying speed. Everything happened in seconds. The knife arced toward Paulette's throat. Hanyul moved faster than thought, his body colliding with hers, spinning them both as the blade meant for her buried itself in his shoulder instead. His grunt of pain was barely audible over the chaos. He fired again, and the attacker crumpled. Then his weight was against her, his blood hot and wet against her chest as he braced himself against the wall. "Hanyul, keep moving," his voice strained but controlled. "Safe room, now." The compound's security team had locked down the breach by the time they reached the reinforced chamber. Medical supplies lined one wall. Paulette's hands shook as she pulled Hanyul toward the light, peeling back his jacket to expose the wound. The knife had struck below his collarbone, deep enough to be serious but not immediately fatal. Blood soaked through his black shirt, making the fabric cling to his skin. He sat heavily on the examination table, his face pale but composed. "I need to see it," Paulette said, her voice steadier than she felt. Years of watching her grandmother nurse neighbors back to health kicked in, muscle memory stronger than fear. She cut away his shirt with surgical scissors, her breath catching at the network of old scars beneath. Bullet wounds, knife marks, burned tissue, a map of violence written across his skin. But she focused on the fresh injury, cleaning it with steady hands despite the way her heart hammered. "You threw yourself in front of me," she whispered, threading the needle for stitches. "You could have died." "Better me than you." He didn't flinch as she began stitching, his eyes fixed on her face instead of the wound. "Why are you really doing this?" The question emerged raw, honest. "Don't tell me it's just about your sister." Hanyul's jaw tightened. She was close enough to see gold flecks in his dark eyes, close enough to feel his breath against her cheek as she worked. "Because I see her in you," he said quietly. "Your strength, your defiance, the way you refuse to disappear even when the world tries to erase you." His hand rose slowly, fingers brushing a curl away from her face. The touch was achingly gentle. "But I see you too, Paulette, not just her ghost. You." The air between them shifted, charged with something that had been building since the first shared meal, the first moment of understanding. His gaze dropped to her lips. She didn't pull away. The distance closed inch by careful inch. The safe room door opened with a pneumatic hiss. Jinwoo strode in, followed by 2 guards, his expression grave. "Sir, we've secured the compound. 3 infiltrators down, 1 captured, but there's something you need to see." The spell shattered. Paulette stepped back, hands trembling now for entirely different reasons. Hanyul's expression hardened back into the mask he wore for everyone else. "Show me," he ordered, sliding off the table as if he hadn't just been stabbed protecting her. as if they hadn't almost crossed a line that would change everything. The attack changed something in the compound's atmosphere. Security doubled, routines tightened, and Paulette, now hyper-aware of every movement around her, began to notice things that didn't fit. Jinwoo had always been present, Hanyul's second in command, his most trusted advisor. Tall, handsome in a cold way, always impeccably dressed, the other guards deferred to him instantly. But in the days following the breach, Paulette caught moments that felt wrong. The way he'd step into empty hallways to take phone calls, his voice dropping to a whisper. How he'd arrive late to security briefings, offering smooth excuses that everyone accepted without question. The way his eyes would linger on her sometimes, calculating rather than protective. She told herself she was being paranoid. The attack had rattled her, made her suspicious of shadows, but the feeling persisted, growing stronger each time she watched Jinwoo's carefully composed mask slip for just a fraction of a second. 3 nights after the breach, Paulette couldn't sleep. She'd taken to wandering the compound's hallways in the early morning hours, the guards now accustomed to her restless presence. She was passing the West Wing offices when she heard Jinwoo's voice, low and urgent, coming from behind a partially closed door. Can't keep delaying, he's becoming too attached to her. If we don't move soon, a pause. I don't care what the original timeline was, the situation has changed. Paulette pressed herself against the wall, her heart racing. She carefully pulled out her phone, switching it to silent, and edged closer to capture audio. Through the door's gap, she could see Jinwoo's reflection in a window, his phone pressed to his ear, his expression harder than she'd ever seen it. The compound's security codes will be sent tomorrow. Make sure your people are ready this time. No more mistakes. Ice flooded Paulette's veins. She backed away slowly, each step measured and silent, until she reached the main hallway. Then she ran. The next evening she followed him. Jinwoo left the compound at 11, his departure logged and approved. Routine business, the gate guard said. Paulette slipped out 10 minutes later through the kitchen service entrance, staying far enough back that he wouldn't spot her tail. He drove to a warehouse district in Guro, parking beside a black sedan she didn't recognize. 2 men emerged. Even from a distance, Paulette could see they weren't Hanyul's people. Their body language was wrong, aggressive, entitled. One had the same cold efficiency as the infiltrators who'd attacked the compound. She photographed everything. The license plates, the faces, Jinwoo handing over what looked like documents, the way money changed hands. Her phone's camera caught him bowing slightly to the older man, deference he never showed anyone except Hanyul. When she tried to show Hanyul the photos the next morning, Jinwoo was already in his office. She'd forgotten they had a daily security briefing. "Sir, I need to speak with you, privately." Hanyul looked up from the reports spread across his desk. "Jinwoo is my head of security. Anything you need to say can be said in front of him." "That's the problem. Miss Laurent has been under significant stress," Jinwoo interrupted smoothly, his voice concerned, almost gentle. "The attack was traumatic. It's natural for her to feel unsafe, to see threats where there aren't any." "I'm not imagining this." Paulette thrust her phone toward Hanyul. "Look at the photos he was meeting with." Jinwoo glanced at the screen and laughed, a warm, reassuring sound. "That's my cousin's auto shop in Guro. I was negotiating a deal on armored vehicles for the compound. Those are his business partners." He turned to Hanyul. "I can provide receipts, contracts, whatever you need to verify." Hanyul's expression was unreadable. "That won't be necessary." "Sir." Paulette, his use of her first name stopped her. "Jinwoo has been with me for 12 years. He saved my life in Busan. I trust him completely." The dismissal in his tone cut deeper than any blade. Jinwoo's smile was sympathetic, almost pitying, as she left the office. But when she glanced back through the closing door, she caught his expression when he thought no one was watching. It wasn't sympathy, it was satisfaction. Paulette spent the next 5 days becoming someone she'd never been before, a spy in silk and desperation. She memorized guard rotations, learned which staff members gossiped, discovered that Mrs. Shin's nephew worked in the compound's IT department and could be bribed with her grandmother's peach cobbler recipe. She smiled, cooked, played the role of the traumatized woman slowly adjusting to captivity, while her mind catalogued every inconsistency, every whispered conversation that stopped when she entered a room. Jinwoo's paper trail was meticulous but not perfect. She found discrepancies in supply orders, shipments that never arrived, payments to vendors that didn't exist. Security footage showed him accessing Hanyul's private server at 3 a.m, downloading files he had no reason to touch. And the coded messages, she photographed them from his unlocked tablet during a moment when he'd stepped away during a meeting, thinking her too cowed to try anything. The messages were in Korean, but Mrs. Shin's nephew translated them for the price of her silence and another cooking lesson. His face went pale as he read. These are coordinates, shipping routes, and this one, he pointed to a series of numbers. That's a bank account in the Caymans. Paulette's hands shook as she compiled everything into a single file on her phone. Financial records, surveillance screenshots, translated messages, the photographs from the warehouse. It was damning, irrefutable. She found Haniel alone in his study just after midnight, the compound quiet except for the distant hum of security monitors. He looked up when she entered without knocking, surprise flickering across his face. We need to talk, now, and Jinwoo cannot be anywhere near this conversation. Something in her voice made him stand, closing the door behind her. What's wrong? She handed him her phone, the evidence queued and ready. Everything. She watched his face as he scrolled through the files, watched disbelief shift to confusion, then to something that looked like grief. His jaw clenched tighter with each image, each translated message. When he reached the financial records showing payments to known trafficking intermediaries, his hands began to shake. This can't be real, he whispered. Jinwoo, he's been with me since we were 19. He's my brother in everything but blood. He's been selling you out for at least 6 months, probably longer. Paulette's voice was gentle despite the urgency screaming through her veins. The attack on the compound, he gave them the security codes. Those men at the warehouse, they're part of the trafficking network. I trust him with my life, but the words sounded hollow now, a prayer to a god that had already abandoned him. But will you trust him with mine? The question hung between them, heavy with everything they'd built in the past weeks, the shared meals, the almost kiss, the way he'd taken a knife meant for her. Haniel looked at her, and she saw his world shattering behind his eyes. I need to. The study door exploded inward. Not a knock, not an announcement, just splintering wood and armed men in tactical gear. Jinwoo strode in behind them, his expression calm, almost regretful. I'm sorry it came to this, he said, though his tone suggested he wasn't sorry at all. You should have trusted me, Hyung. You should have let me handle her quietly. Haniel reached for his weapon, but 2 men already had guns trained on him. Don't, Jinwoo warned. They'll kill you, and I'd rather not lose you. You're still useful. Hands grabbed Paulette from behind. She fought, thrashing against their grip, but there were too many. A needle pierced her neck, and the world began to tilt. Paulette, Haniel's voice, raw with fury and something that sounded like anguish. The last thing she saw before darkness claimed her was Jinwoo's satisfied smile and Haniel's face, devastated, betrayed, watching her disappear. Paulette woke to the smell of rust and human fear. Her head throbbed, visions swimming as consciousness dragged her back into a nightmare she'd never imagined. The floor beneath her was corrugated metal, cold and unforgiving. Dim industrial lights flickered overhead, casting everything in sickly yellow. And around her, pressed against the walls of what she slowly recognized as a shipping container, were women. 12 of them, maybe more, some crying softly, others staring at nothing with hollow eyes. Different ages, different nationalities, Filipino, Vietnamese, Thai, African. One girl couldn't have been older than 16. You're awake, the voice came from her left. A woman with kind eyes despite the bruises on her face. Don't try to move too fast, they drugged us all. Paulette's stomach lurched. She pushed herself up on trembling arms, taking in the horror of her surroundings. The container had been modified, ventilation holes drilled in the sides, a bucket in the corner for waste, water bottles lined against one wall like some perverse hospitality. This wasn't improvised, this was routine. The container door screeched open, flooding them with harsh light. Jinwoo stepped inside, flanked by 2 guards, his expensive suit incongruous against the industrial squalor. Ah, you're conscious, good. He crouched in front of Paulette, his expression almost conversational. I need you alert for the photos. Your buyer prefers his acquisitions aware of their situation. Buyer, the words scraped out of her throat. Did you think this was personal? Jinwoo laughed. Your merchandise, Paulette, valuable merchandise, admittedly. American passport, educated, no family looking for you in Seoul. You'll fetch an excellent price in Dubai. Rage burned through the lingering drugs. Haniel will. Haniel is currently restrained in his own compound, watching his organization tear itself apart from the inside. Jinwoo's voice hardened. Do you know how much money his obsession with protecting worthless foreign workers has cost us? Millions. Operations shut down, trafficking routes abandoned, partnerships dissolved because he suddenly grew a conscience over his dead sister. He stood, brushing off his knees as if he'd knelt in something distasteful. He chose you over his own family, over the men who have bled for him. So yes, this is partly personal, but mostly it's business. One of the guards held up a phone, camera pointed at Paulette. The flash blinded her. They photographed all of them, faces blank with terror, the shipping container's serial number visible in the background, evidence of life, proof of product. "We ship out in 3 hours, Jinwoo announced to his men. "Make sure they're sedated for transport. Can't have them making noise in international waters." The door sealed shut behind him, plunging them back into dim yellow hell. Paulette's hands found her pocket, empty. They'd taken her phone, her shoes, anything that could be used as a weapon or tracking device. Around her, women wept quietly or prayed in languages she didn't understand. The 16-year-old girl stared at her with eyes that had already given up hope. "We're going to die, aren't we?" the girl whispered in accented English. Paulette wanted to lie, to offer comfort, but her voice wouldn't form the words. 300 miles away, Hanyul sat bound in his own study, surrounded by Jinwoo's men, his knuckles split and bleeding from the fight they'd finally subdued him with. His phone buzzed with an incoming message. The photo loaded slowly, Paulette's face, tear-streaked and terrified, a shipping container number visible behind her. Then another photo, and another, 12 women total. The message beneath was simple: "She's already gone, let her go." Something fractured inside him, the last restraint he'd maintained, the final thread of civilization he'd clung to. His father's voice echoed in his memory: "Sometimes mercy is weakness. Sometimes you must become the monster they fear." When Hanyul looked up at his captors, his eyes had gone cold and empty. The man in that chair was no longer the one who'd fed Paulette dinner in a quiet kitchen or taken a knife to protect her. The monster Jinwoo had always warned about had finally woken up. And it was hungry. The assault began at dawn, when the world was still caught between darkness and light. Hanyul's loyal guards, the ones who'd served him before Jinwoo's corruption spread, moved like shadows through the port facility. No sirens, no warnings, just the whisper of suppressed gunfire and the heavy silence of men who'd chosen their side and would see it through to the end. Hanyul led from the front, his weapon an extension of his fury. Every man who stood between him and that shipping container was an obstacle to be removed with cold efficiency. He'd shed the careful control he'd maintained for years, the civilized veneer he'd built over his father's legacy. What remained was something primal and unforgiving. The first line of Jinwoo's men fell within minutes. The second put up more resistance, a firefight that lit up the warehouse district in muzzle flashes and ricocheting bullets. Hanyul took a round to his vest, the impact driving the air from his lungs, but he couldn't slow. The image of Paulette's terrified face burned behind his eyes like a brand. They fought through 3 warehouses before reaching the container yard. Bodies littered the ground, some his men, most Jinwoo's. The cost of betrayal measured in blood and broken loyalty. He found the container by its serial number, the one from the photograph. His hands shook as he cut through the lock, and when the doors swung open, the smell of fear and desperation nearly drove him to his knees. 12 pairs of eyes stared at him from the darkness. And there, slumped against the wall, barely conscious from whatever they'd given her, Paulette. "I've got you," he whispered, gathering her into his arms. She was lighter than he remembered, her body limp and trusting even in her drugged state. "I've got you." Behind him, his men were evacuating the other women, calling for medical support, securing the perimeter. But Hanyul's world had narrowed to the woman in his arms and the exit 50 yards away. He was halfway there when Jinwoo stepped into his path. His former brother was bloodied, his expensive suit torn, but his weapon was steady and pointed directly at Hanyul's chest. "You can't save them all," Jinwoo said, his voice ragged. "You never could, that's what you never understood." "Move," Hanyul's voice was devoid of anything human. "She's made you weak, just like my son made you weak, just like every person you've tried to save has made you weak." Jinwoo's finger tightened on the trigger. "Our father built an empire on strength, you're destroying it for sentiment." "No," Hanyul adjusted his grip on Paulette, his own weapon rising despite the burden in his arms. "She's made me remember what I'm fighting for. There's a difference between strength and cruelty. Father never learned it, you never learned it, but I finally have." "Then you've already lost." "Have I?" The shot came from Hanyul's left, one of his guards, positioned on the warehouse roof. Jinwoo's weapon clattered to the ground as he stumbled, clutching his shoulder. Hanyul's men swarmed in, disarming him, forcing him to his knees. Hanyul walked past his former brother without a second glance, Paulette secure against his chest. Behind them, the facility erupted in flames, evidence burning, corruption turning to ash, an empire built on suffering finally collapsing. "Sir," one of his men called. "Police are 2 minutes out, we need to move." Get the women to Dr. Kim's clinic, all of them, I don't care what it costs. Hanyul climbed into the back of the SUV, still cradling Paulette. And Jinwoo, make sure he lives long enough to face every charge. I want him to watch everything he built fall apart. As they drove away from the burning facility, Paulette stirred in his arms. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused but aware. Hanyul, her voice was barely a whisper. I'm here, you're safe now. The others? Safe, all of them. He pressed his lips to her forehead, a gesture of relief and promise. I won't let anyone hurt you again. For the first time in 8 years, the weight on his chest felt lighter. 6 months later, Itaewon had never smelled so good. The restaurant sat on a corner lot with floor-to-ceiling windows that let the autumn sunlight pour across reclaimed wood tables and exposed brick walls. Paulette's table read the sign in both English and Korean, the lettering elegant but unpretentious. Inside, the scent of blackened catfish and kimchi mingled impossibly well, creating something entirely new, like the woman who'd imagined it. Paulette moved through her dining room with practiced grace, adjusting flower arrangements, checking place settings one final time. Her natural curls were swept up in a silk scarf, and she wore a simple black dress that spoke of confidence rather than hiding. The scar on her wrist, once a source of shame, was visible now, a reminder of survival she no longer felt the need to conceal. You're going to wear a hole in the floor, Mrs. Shin called from the kitchen in Korean, then in careful English. Everything is perfect. Almost perfect, Paulette corrected with a smile. The first guests would arrive in 20 minutes. Food critics, neighborhood residents, some of Hanyul's staff who'd become genuine friends during her cooking lessons, and one particular guest whose RSVP had sat on her desk for a week before she'd finally opened it. The door chimed, she turned, and there he was. Hanyul had traded his severe black suits for charcoal grey, his presence less commanding and more quietly assured. He carried a single white orchid, elegant, meaningful without being excessive. When he met her eyes, she saw none of the possessive protector who'd once locked her in a gilded cage, just a man who'd learned to let go. You came, she said softly. I was invited, he offered the orchid. Congratulations, Paulette, this is remarkable. She took the flower, led him to a corner table, the best seat in the house, positioned where he could see everything but wouldn't dominate the space. As he sat, she joined him for a moment before the chaos of opening night began. I wanted to thank you, Paulette said, her voice steady. You taught me that accepting help isn't weakness, that protection doesn't have to mean possession. Hanyul's expression softened, and you taught me that love means letting go, that the strongest thing I could do was give you the choice I never gave my son. Silence settled between them, comfortable rather than heavy. Through the window, Seoul moved past in rivers of light and motion, a city that had tried to swallow her and had instead become the soil where she'd planted roots. You're not leaving, he asked quietly. No, Paulette smiled, and it reached her eyes in ways it never had in those early weeks of captivity. But I'm not staying because of you. I'm staying because this is home now. These streets, these people. This restaurant, I built this, me, and that means something. It means everything. Hanyul lifted his water glass. The restaurant didn't have its liquor license yet. To new beginnings. She raised her own glass, crystal catching the light. To new beginnings, and to knowing when to hold on and when to let go. Their glasses chimed together, a sound like a promise fulfilled. Around them, guests began filtering in, voices rising in anticipation and welcome. Mrs. Shin emerged from the kitchen with the first plates, and Paulette stood to greet her customers, her people in her space on her terms. Hanyul watched her work the room with pride that held no ownership, only genuine joy for what she'd become. When their eyes met across the crowded restaurant, she smiled, and he returned it. Partners, not possessions. Equals, not captor and captive. Two people who'd found freedom not by running from each other, but by learning to stand together on ground they'd both chosen. The food was perfect, the night was magic, and for the first time since stepping foot in Seoul, Paulette knew exactly where she belonged. Thank you for listening till the end. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more stories that speak to the heart. Where in the world are you turning in from? Let me know in the comments so we can connect and share our thoughts. I appreciate the time you spent here with me today.